Hello, Avatar fans, and welcome to the next episode of the Avatar Online podcast. This is going to be episode 284 of our regular shows, and we're recording this one on January 25th, 2025. First podcast of the year. This is the official podcast for the fan site, AvatarTheLastAirbenderOnline.com, and I'm going to be your main host, Morgan Airspeed Prime. Joining me on the podcast is Greg2B from the site.
What's up, everyone?
Excellent. So, on today's show, as usual, we're going to be doing some news, which there is actually some interesting stuff to talk about, and then we'll be jumping back into our Avatar and Korra reviews. This time, just doing the two Avatar episodes we didn't do on the last podcast, because we had a lot of, Earth Avatar show leaks to talk about, so we only did the Korra episode. This time out, we're going to be doing the Serpents Pass and the Drill, so that will ease us back into the year. But we have news to talk about, so we'll start off with the big one that hit just over a week into the year. Now, it's interesting because this was something that just got discovered, but was actually up online since about September last year. So initially, the way that this came out was just a screenshot of a bunch of kind of square pictures that is basically a lineup of Avatar Studios projects. The source on this then was revealed to be this Vimeo account that had this Avatar Legends video, where effectively it's just like a 9-second video where these kind of tiles form together on screen. You see like words like gaming, digital experiences and stuff like that come up on screen, and then it cuts to Avatar Legends, and it's some sort of a marketing video. This is somewhat official and not some random person putting this up, because the person who owned this Vimeo account has on like their own website and on their LinkedIn and stuff like that they've done work for Paramount before, including Avatar kind of related stuff, because they were at the kind of licensing expo last year where there was some Avatar stuff there, clearly behind the scenes especially, and some of those kind of art things match up with what's in this video. So it's a little bit weird as to why was this just up there publicly, but it seems leaning official. Hard to say if it's like absolutely 100% official, but at the same time, what ended up happening, like usual, is within a day, this was taken down. We don't know the details behind who did it, why it happened, but it was taken down within a day of it actually going public as news. Again, it had been up since September. A day after it goes live in January, it's gone. And I think we all know what that typically means. Paramount have been roughly trying to take down a lot of this more leaked information stuff. It obviously doesn't really work because of the internet, but that's the way it is. So before we get into the details of this, just what are your thoughts on what this is as a piece of news, where this comes from? Do you view this as being official, official adjacent or something like that? What are your thoughts overall on this?
I like that term, official adjacent. I think that's probably what I would consider it, just because it's been up for a while, and from what we understand, what you're just explained, it comes from a source that has worked with the company. The only thing that I would be leery about is just sort of how, set in stone this is with anything that, is media and entertainment and projects like that. Everything is sort of up in the air. Even things that are sort of green lit can still, be hit or miss in terms of when things actually come out and the actual sort of exact way that it comes out. So I wouldn't be surprised if this is what they have in mind, or at least when they created this sort of really quick promotional animation video that anyone can do, just that they have access to the assets, which makes it seem and probably is more sort of official in terms of how it was actually used internally and externally for companies and stuff like that. But I wouldn't hold it to be, exactly how things actually come out, since there's not there's any sort of dates or anything on this. And this is pretty much what we already sort of know. It's not anything particularly crazy new. But, it's cool to see they're moving things behind the scenes as always.
Yeah, there's not a lot of context really behind this. I think the assumption that people have come to is that likely, especially with the words in the background, like gaming and digital experiences, collectibles and stuff like that, it's probably was some sort of a visual aid type thing that they showed to licensors, probably at the licensing expo, which I think would have taken place a couple of months before September. And obviously behind the scenes, I guess stuff like this would be happening, that they want people to have Avatar products out, and they're highlighting that, hey, look at all this stuff that we're going to do, like the franchise is going to be coming back. You already probably know it's quite exciting because of Netflix Avatar, which gets referenced here as well. And I think it makes sense in that regard. So let's go through this. So fundamentally what the news is here is that it's 7 sort of tiles all lined up next to each other in what seems to be chronological order, roughly. They highlight Netflix Avatar at the start, that season 2 and 3 have been green lit. Now that's obviously separate from Paramount, but it's still Avatar. They have that just at the front, but they mentioned that it's green lit rather than the dates of whenever season 2 and 3 are dropping. I think that's fine, that makes sense. There hasn't really been merchandise for the most part about Netflix Avatar. Interestingly, the 2026 calendar from Abrams is going to be Netflix Avatar themed, so they're beginning to kind of lean to having more merchandise there. But what would your thoughts be on just the fact that, like, somewhat officially they actually include Netflix Avatar on like a Paramount Avatar thing?
Yeah, I mean, I think, we've come to the conclusion that, nothing's in the vacuum, and, they've already, even before the whole, sort of thing happened with the creators and stuff like that, in terms of who actually owns the license to it. So it's still, CBS, Viacom, Paramount, and all that sort of stuff. So, they still have enough in it to, like, mention it, because it's still part of Avatar. It's still part of the whole overall branding, even if they're not directly producing it or anything sort of like that. So, and it is the currently, sort of the one thing that's actually active right now. None of the other stuff is actually active. So, it makes sense to me that if there was anything that they would put on it, they would put that there.
Yeah, and it makes sense as well, because that's a Netflix like success. It's not just that season 1 came out, it's that season 1 came out, was successful enough to immediately get its full run, and that's kind of big and notable to mention. But the remaining 6 are all Avatar Studios projects. Now, the first one, of course, they mention here, it's a theatrical, so it's a movie. It's Aang the Last Airbender. Interestingly, we do get a logo that we have never seen before. It is Aang the Last Airbender in a somewhat unique looking font. They also have the element symbols over the top. Interestingly reordered to have air first, which is sort of different than what's been sort of traditionally on the logo, or even I think on the more modern kind of like Avatar Studios logo, the elements are in a slightly different order because it makes sense with Aang. Air goes first. Is this the actual finalized logo for the movie? It's hard to say, because we don't know for sure that Aang the Last Airbender is the finalized title for the movie, especially because we got that copyright information about Lost Realm being involved somewhere in the title, which is part of the confusion. But as like I guess something that they have in the background as a potential logo, I think it looks pretty nice. This is a thing we're obviously waiting for more recent information to happen, like quite soon. But we know that this is the first project. There's nothing really to say here. But do you have any thoughts on the logo here and what they've kind of done here?
Yeah, it is interesting that you make note that they reordered it, but I think it's really just in terms of, popularity of the elements and sort of what we've seen so far. So I don't know. That sort of makes sense to me. And yeah, the logo is fine. I mean, logos can change so much over the course of, a project coming out. So I wouldn't be surprised if it looks completely different in the actual movie.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and even if they do go with this, the idea is that that logo will likely accompany a poster which will have a visual on it. Like, text sort of title logos are always a little bit boring. Even for like, I think the Sonic 4 recently got like a logo, I think, revealed. And sure, it's just Sonic and there's a 4 in a slightly different color. Like it's not super interesting. We want to see actual visuals, and that's what we're waiting for. The second Avatar Studios tile is new series, and the visual is just the earth bending symbol, which fits in line with what we've known for years, and especially with what we learned kind of in December about like all the leaks coming out for the Earth Avatar series, Pavi. This makes sense. I think this is the only real quote-unquote locked-in Avatar Studios stuff we have, is that we're starting off with an Aang movie, and then the first series is going to be an Earth Avatar show. I'd be surprised if this gets switched up, and this lines up with that, even though there's no, I suppose, clear, direct visual about this. I don't think there's too much speculation here. I think most people kind of agree with this being the first two projects lined up. But do you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, no, that it definitely goes in line with what we sort of thought so far. So yeah.
Yep. Third one is Theatrical 2. Again, we've already known that they're confirmed for 3 movies. They mentioned this in like 2022, so we've known for ages that they plan to do multiple movies. But apart from rumors, we've never really had any concrete information on, is it a trilogy of Aang movies? Are we doing a Korra movie? And this is where like lots of stuff like Kyoshi and stuff like that's been thrown out. This seems to suggest, with what they use here as visuals, that the 3 movies, because there is a Theatrical 3, they're all Aang related, because the first one of course has the logo Aang the Last Airbender. Theatrical 2 actually has a new piece of art. It looks like a piece of concept art of Aang in the same design that we saw from the leaked 2023 image, walking towards some sort of ruins, potentially of a lost realm. And then the Theatrical 3 also features the same Aang design, airbending in the sky. So brand new kind of art we've never seen before, attached to these. It's hard to fully judge of like, does that confirm that all 3 movies are Aang? That does make sense. Maybe not a lot of variety, but I think it's the way to use probably Aang stuff going forward. And that's kind of interesting, and this has been one of the main talking points here. But what are your thoughts on this? Some potential pieces of new art here, and what are your thoughts on, does this kind of confirm or lean towards Aang movie trilogy?
Yeah, that's a good point there. I mean, I don't know. I mean, the art itself, I think, is cool. I think any art that we usually get, with Avatar and stuff, usually it looks pretty awesome. So it's definitely cool to see that, especially with the older character design, which we don't really have that much of yet, of course. But in terms of confirming it, I don't know. I don't know. I mean, I would hope that they would, branch out a little bit, but at the same time, the way that marketing and money and investors and stuff like that, if they're really trying to own in on what brings the most bang for their buck, I wouldn't be, too surprised, unfortunately, if that is the route that they go with. I mean, I would hope that they would at least do one that sort of transitions into sort of like other things and newer projects and stuff like that, or newer characters or newer, histories that we haven't explored or anything like that. But in terms of, what might be sort of a sure sort of sale, I don't know. I wouldn't be surprised if they are sort of somewhat related to Aang and his sort of history.
Mm-hmm. I suppose it's worth bringing up at this point. It seems like Mike, I think, on some sort of an interview he did somewhat recently, relatively unrelated to Avatar. Apparently he mentioned something about the idea that Paramount are more hands-on with the movie stuff than they are with the series stuff. So I think this lines up with what we kind of expected, which is that Paramount, almost like the Avatar Studios deal happening, is sort of like, hey, we'll let you make all your creative series doing whatever you want in exchange for the Aang movies that you've maybe never really wanted to make. And that kind of seems like kind of what's happening here, that the movies are going to be very solid kind of fundamentals, Avatar, appealing to everyone, giving the kind of fans what they want. The series likely are going to be much more kind of maybe experimental, doing stuff kind of like Korra and so what some of the rumors are suggesting about the Earth Avatar series, that sort of thing. Now, yeah, there's all the discussion about, where's Korra in all of this? She'll obviously be past life in the Earth Avatar series, but yeah, does this mean we can only ever do Aang in the movies? It's hard to say right now, and I understand some of that frustration, but it's still early days. We don't really know the full scope. They haven't really fully officially talked about what the plans are. This is just an idea. But yeah, that's Theatrical 2. My guess is the images are probably concept art from the first movie, and they're just kind of including them here to give that rough idea of like, hey, it is a trilogy of movies. It won't just be a one and done type thing, which I do think makes sense. I think because of the reality of the movie, like it's going to be like a 90-minute movie, people are going to want more immediately. So if they have a locked in idea already for a trilogy, that's really good to kind of get Avatar Studios through the first couple of The next tile is probably the overall most interesting one because it's the hardest one to predict. It's new series, but there's an air symbol here. So this is where the discussion of like, are these symbols just placeholders? Do they actually mean anything? Because this obviously breaks the cycle of like main series where we've gone from air Aang, water Korra, Pavi Earth. Now we're back to air. We're not doing fire. But Avatar Studios is doing spin-offs, short form content, that sort of stuff as well. There are other styles of projects. So my guess on this is probably that this is one of these kind of, it's not a main series. This might be the kind of kid show type thing, something like that. They might just be deciding to do this where like we seem to know that the Earth Avatar show is at least 26 episodes. That might only be 26 episodes. Maybe they will be able to immediately transition into a new Avatar. I don't think this probably means Yang Chen. I'd be super surprised if Aang's getting movies, but then he's also getting another series. That would be a bit overloaded on Aang, and that might be a bit frustrating. So they're either doing something really crazy with this, so full on moving on to a new Air Avatar, or it is just a different style of series. But it's hard to predict. But otherwise, there's not a lot of mention of like different styles of projects in this list. But do you have any thoughts on a potential new Air series?
Yeah, I don't know. I think that's really cool. I mean, I think, in terms of the elements and stuff, that's always been one that's been popular because, we have Aang there. I don't think that it would be sort of another Aang one because that does feel like you're saying a bit sort of too much, unless it's some sort of like tie-in between the two movies or something like that to sort of like hold people over until the next movie sort of comes out. If they're really sort of trying to plan out and link things together, I could see that potentially sort of working. If 2 and 3 movies are all Aang related, but otherwise it really could be sort of anything.
Yeah, like there's been rumors of like, almost basically like what the description of that new book, Bending Academy, is like that almost being a series, and I'm almost wondering like there hasn't been any new information on that book. Like, is that just it kind of type thing? Because that I could see that being a thing where it's technically like it's maybe set in the Aang era, but it doesn't really involve Aang, so that's why it's like an Air kind of series type thing. But who knows? It could be pretty much anything. This might be the first very different project that's nothing we could have expected. There's that. Then there's Theatrical 3, which again, like I said, has the picture of Aang, and it seems to be suggesting the trilogy overall, which is fine. That brings us up to the number of movies that have already been announced so far. We are just probably waiting to see what the situation is with this being a trilogy or not. Now, obviously, getting into this discussion, we're getting close to, they're going to have to start marketing the first movie at some point over the next couple of months. It's going to have to show up at some of these industry shows that we're going to talk about shortly. But at what point do they kind of need to be like, hey, don't think of this as just a one-off movie. This is a trilogy. At what point do they confirm if it is or isn't a trilogy? What are your thoughts on that?
That's a good question. I wonder about that. I mean, I don't know. They seem to be very sort of hesitant to sort of like jump the gun on things like that. So I don't know. I mean, I could see them waiting to say, officially, even though we know sort of behind the scenes they have, aspirations of it being, sort of a trilogy and more until after it sort of like comes out and we actually get some real sort of feedback about it. I mean, I don't know. Maybe if sort of like the trailer and sort of the early critic reviews is so good they're able to sort of like greenlit things based off of that purely itself. But I don't know. I wouldn't be surprised if they don't wait until, it's actually sort of out there and sort of people have seen it, sort of regular people, to actually get sort of a feeling if it's really, worth the sort of like investing into the future and stuff past what they've sort of already sort of confirmed. So I don't know. I think it would be a little bit, even if they are sort of already planning for that.
Mm-hmm. And then the last one is interesting. It says new content. It doesn't say new series or theatrical. It's new content, Fire. I think most people have come to the conclusion this is the AAA Avatar video game because the picture that we have seems to be of a fire avatar, and they were really hyping it up that it has a whole new story. It is a new Avatar. It's set in the past. It's the first time we're getting a proper AAA Avatar game, and it fits the whole idea that there is the mention of gaming in this video as well. Um, Otherwise, I guess the mention here would suggest it's either that or it's short form content, whatever that is for Avatar, but we just don't have any real sense for what that is. But what are your thoughts on this? Do you think this is just a game, or might it be something different?
I don't know. That's a good one. I mean, I want to hope that it's the game, especially, considering that if we're thinking about like the real sort of like years and timeline of this whole thing, which we don't know because it doesn't say on this, like that could be sort of anything at that sort of point there. But, if it's far enough down the line, I definitely could see that being the game, considering, the game's not going to be anytime soon. It'll be like a couple years, 3, 4, whatever, until we actually sort of get it. So I wouldn't be surprised if that is the game, but that could be a lot of things. It could be another mini series. It could be some other sort of short form content. There's a lot that they could do with that. I think really it's just sort of, another element that's sort of popular. So they're throwing it up there to get people invested in it.
Yeah, and then the other thing that isn't mentioned in this as well is how do like different seasons of the series fit into all this other stuff? Like, is there an overlap between the Earth series and the Air series? Or by the time the Air series starts, will the Earth series be over? Because if they're going crazy with content, there is a chance that there is that much overlap, but we just don't know. You mentioned the sort of timeline of this. So if we try and speculate about that, so obviously Aang, The Last Airbender, currently scheduled for January 30th, 2026. And I think at this point, like, I can see the date getting slightly adjusted, but either way, it's like, I'm pretty sure it's going to be locked in for Q1 2026. It's not going to get super heavily delayed, given that it's already been delayed, and they just have to start doing stuff eventually. Then the Earth series, like the speculation's always been that, they've said when stuff finally starts to happen, there'll be a lot kind of all at once type thing. So the Earth series should be following relatively quickly afterwards, suggesting mid to late 2026. Maybe stretching into like early 2027, so they always have something in each year. Then the movie is up next. I'm guessing it's going to be 2 years between each movie, at a guess. So 2026, then a 2028 thing. But then you're thinking like, well, 26 episodes, that's probably split into 2 seasons. Well, that's a way to kind of fill in some time as well. And then there's like another series, and then like another 2 years. Is that what we're doing? 2026, 2028, 2030? Or what? Because the game, they already said, was basically like, it's probably 2027 at the earliest, but they literally, I think in that video, said 2028 is an absolute possibility for it. So I'm not sure what the layout on all of this is, because if the game is going to be 2028 at the like latest potentially, are they really going to somehow release 3 movies and 2 series in about 3 years, give or take? That's kind of difficult and it's hard to judge. But we also don't know what's happening at Avatar Studios, because they've been so silent for so long. They could have a lot of this stuff ready to go. We just don't know. What would your breakdown be for like roughly what a schedule could be for all this stuff?
Yeah, I mean, we're going with 26 for the movie and the series following after that. I mean, my thing that I wonder is sort of how involved these other new series are. Because I mean, the whole idea of the 2 years for the movie, so 26 and 28 and 30. I mean, that could work. If they're actually sort of keeping things sort of on schedule and on timeline, everything like that. But we all know that entertainment, especially, is very sort of up in the air in terms of things and how people are viewing things. This is all hoping that we get sort of the sort of favored outcome of everything, sort of working in line. But I don't know. I would wonder if sort of the next new series, if it's the same sort of length as what we're sort of getting with the Earth one. Because I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if it is maybe something a little bit sort of shorter, if they're really trying to sort of keep this sort of timeline in sort of play in terms of like when things actually are produced. Because if the apparent game sort of does come out in 28, I mean, that could work, but I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if that gets pushed a little bit more as well. So I don't know. It's kind of hard to sort of predict things, but I mean, 2030, we could have a bunch of stuff by then, especially if, like what you're saying, if everything is sort of gonna come out in a rush. And this isn't even, including any of the other sort of, media stuff that might not be big enough to be mentioned on this sort of like investor timeline thing, but it's also coming out as well.
Hmm. Yeah, and then there's always the chance that probably more than likely there is another series in here as well. Because that would be my guess, is that there's probably just as many series as movies in development as well, especially if like the Air one maybe is more of a kind of kids focused show that maybe isn't as broad in scope as something like the Earth Avatar series. But yeah, it's interesting. It's definitely grabbed a lot of people's attention, because I think most people are probably at the point where like we want officially something like this. We want them to present to us what the plan for Avatar Studios is, what the slate is. And sure, maybe they're never going to go quite as wide as they go talking to licensors directly to the audience, but like we're looking for sort of like probably like the first two or three. Like, hey, you know about the movie, finally confirm the Earth Avatar series, and then yeah, probably like answer the question of like, are the movies all separate? Is it a trilogy? That's probably what we'd be wanting from like an initial announcement, and then everything else is just like, we know you're also working on other stuff, but it's probably a little bit too far out. It's getting late enough in the game where I think they probably have to start kind of saying something about the movie too, unless it's like super far off. But yeah, it's just an interesting sign, and hopefully we get something like this that's kind of official soon. Which, speaking of which, moving on to the next piece of news, the schedule for CinemaCon 2025 has now gone live. So this is an event where we would expect some news to come out. I'll get into the details of this in a second, but Paramount have their presentation on April 3rd. This is the last day of the event. It's March 31st to April 3rd. So Paramount is going pretty late, though I think it's early April 3rd. It's like at 9 or something like that. Doors open at 9. They're going to have their, what does it say here? Paramount Pictures invites you to an exclusive presentation highlighting its upcoming slate. Avatar should be part of that, with a movie out about 9 months after this event. So we would expect it to be here because it was at this event the last 2 years. Last year, they announced the cast at this event. The year before that, the leaked image happened. And the idea would be that probably some sort of an early trailer gets shown here. We probably won't see it. It won't come out publicly unless it leaks. But we should be able to get descriptions of this. Like, text reports are allowed to come out of CinemaCon, which is usually a behind closed doors event. But something is about to happen, I think. And this is the first, I suppose, locked in thing where we absolutely expect stuff to happen. But what are your thoughts on CinemaCon coming up?
Yeah, I mean, I really do hope we get something out of it. It seems like we get a little bit of something that we can really sort of, I don't know, sort of dig into, which is always sort of fun. It is, too bad that it is sort of an industry exclusive event, but I think, just the idea that they're having stuff there and ready to go, is very sort of positive forward thinking in terms of, when we might actually get stuff that we can see. So no, I'm looking forward to at least hearing something from it.
Yeah, so this is probably where we need to have a little bit of this discussion about when will they finally say something. Waiting until early April with about 9 months to go is okay. Like, for a movie, that's probably about when you need to have stuff roughly officially announced. Given that we're in this kind of half situation where like the movie has been announced technically, but like very little of it feels like super locked in. Like, it's hard to find information that's super clear cut on the movie. And they need to fix that at some point soon. Like, logo release, finalize the title, and just say stuff like that. Release a description, a vague description of like what the movie's actually about. Those sort of things we still don't have yet, which is why everything still feels so up in the air. So, obviously, in about 5 days, we're going to be 1 year exactly to go. I don't think they're going to care too much about that, but it's like, I suppose for us as a fandom, the countdown properly starts at that day. February 21st will be the 20th anniversary of the start of Avatar, which is a very notable milestone for the franchise, and would be a really nice date to do an announcement on, because, you know, you're a month into your year countdown, basically, until the movie. Feels like a nice day to highlight, like, the start and also future of the franchise. But again, I don't think they care about anniversaries all that much, which then I think brings us to CinemaCon, which is, like I said, end of March, early April is when the Paramount one is. If they don't say something here, I'd be very confused. I think the fandom would be left in a pretty weird situation with regards to, you showed this like 2 or 3 events in a row, but now you don't in the year we expected. I think it's going to be here. They have to do it just because it's a movie. It's going to follow kind of industry standard marketing kind of protocols, basically. I'd be shocked if there isn't anything about it. But what are your thoughts on, like, when are we actually going to begin to hear some stuff, like, officially this year about this first movie?
Yeah, I mean, I don't. Yeah, any of the other dates for, you know, sort of anniversaries and stuff like that, like we've seen before, those being very sort of little in sort of the grand scheme of things. I mean, I think, you know, if we see a social media post from any of the official channels, I would kind of be surprised on that sort of front there. So that definitely leaves me along the lines, like you're saying, the thinking towards of CinemaCon in terms of like when we actually sort of get anything, unless there's some sort of other sort of Paramount sort of investor sort of event type thing where they might, you know, say something just to sort of generate some sort of extra buzz. I'd be surprised if there was anything before that. No, and I would be surprised if we would see anything even before sort of one of the Comic Cons coming up. But even then, you know, considering how sort of close-lipped they've been a lot, I don't know how much we would get at any of those sort of things, but I would hope that, you know, we would hear something from CinemaCon that would sort of start the chain of things actually sort of coming out, at least if they're following sort of the normal conventions of things sort of actually coming out. Unless they were doing like some sort of, you know, lower run sort of thing or limited run thing, which doesn't seem like they're going to do that, at least not for the first one. No, I'd be surprised if they didn't start pumping things out after that point.
Mm-hmm. The next piece of news is interesting with regards to, maybe they are getting ready to say something. So it's just one where, like, when I say the news, it might not mean all that much, but then you kind of think about the timing and it's like, actually this might mean something. Basically what happened here, the official Avatar YouTube account, the one with over 3 million subscribers, they recently changed their @username on YouTube from, I think it was Team Avatar, to Avatar Legends. There's no additional update to this. They just changed what their username is. But that is something that's sort of complicated to do on YouTube. Like, that requires, I think, directly, like, contacting, communicating with YouTube about. And they did that randomly here within the last week. Why is this? What does this mean? Team Avatar seemed like a perfectly fine @username for the channel, but they changed it to Avatar Legends, which is something we've been talking about for a very long time in terms of what's the name of the franchise. This seems to all but confirm they're going for Avatar Legends. The only hesitation, I think, with this name has always been that they've never quite attached Avatar Legends to anything super big. It's always been like, okay, the RPG is Avatar Legends, the Minecraft, you know, DLC crossover thing, that was Avatar Legends. We're beginning to get more and more Avatar Legends stuff as we go forward. There's a book coming out next year, a kid's book that's going to feature Avatar Legends. Realms Collide is Avatar Legends. The first piece of news that we talked about today was an Avatar Legends video that had the Avatar Legends logo at the end. That's the first time Legends has been attached to, like, the movie and new series coming forward, as like an overall franchise title. And that's just interesting in the sense of, I think that's the start of like a little bit of a marketing kind of push that, like, okay, they're maybe beginning to get their social media stuff in order, because of course they're going to want to use their 3 million subscriber YouTube channel to post news stuff about like when they're finally ready to start talking. And I think they want everything in order when it comes to like naming conventions for everything. I think this is why the title for the movie seems to be relatively late in getting kind of confirmed. I think there's still probably confusion about what exactly they want to call it. Is it Avatar Legends, Aang the Last Airbender? Is it Avatar Legends, Lost Realm? Do you use all three of those things? There's always been this confusion. But what are your thoughts on this? Do you think this means anything that the YouTube channel is now using Avatar Legends as they're using?
I don't know. I mean, definitely can see how people are sort of taking it to mean that they're sort of trying to get their sort of branding and sort of in line and make it sort of consistent with everything else. No, and it's a good name. We know that they've had it sort of earmarked in terms of, sort of an official name that they could potentially use, and they have used it on several occasions. So I don't know. I mean, I think it works for me in general if that is what they're sort of gonna go with going forward in terms of the whole Avatar universe and stuff like that. So I don't know. I think I definitely could see it, meaning that it could keep things sort of in line. But again, with everything else sort of being sort of far off, it is kind of hard to say what it actually really means, if anything at all.
Yeah. It's just the idea that they need something, because officially in like press releases and stuff like that, they can't really just say like the Avatar universe, because you might confuse people like you're talking about James Cameron's Avatar. That's why like they've used Avatarverse one word occasionally, but I don't think most people like that much. So Avatar Legends universe, I think, has always kind of felt pretty nice as a way to do it, where it still features Avatar, but the Legends aspect refers to the entire franchise and not just Aang, not just the Last Airbender stuff. So it's just one of those things where I think it's hard to imagine they just randomly decided to change their name, because it's a little bit of work to do that change, because it's like your full on like username of your account. It's not just your screen name where you're allowed to change like that a little bit more regularly. It's the underlying username. So they've made this decision for a reason. We just need to see them actually kind of deliver at this point. So hopefully it's a sign of things to come overall. And then we get into the last piece of news, which is Avatar Legends RPG stuff. This is the Voyage of the Unity Premium Adventure set. Finally, we're getting some more concrete information about this. I would say so far, over the last maybe like 6 or so months, we've known about this thing. I think the information's been pretty terribly communicated about this, and that finally they're getting it back on track here. We have the kind of preview launching soon Kickstarter page for this thing. Again, this is Beetle and Grimm's working with Magpie on some new Avatar Legends material. So we have a better idea of what it is now. Obviously, Voyage of the Unity, it means it's Roku era in its entirety. It is 5 interconnected adventures, all set in the Roku era, all related to the Unity. But they mention here that some of them is just, it's set on the ship. Some of them, they dock at a port, and it's set in one of the nations, I guess, as part of the Grand Tour of the Unity. But the most interesting part of this is that they do detail some of like what's actually going on. What do you actually get in this? It says here there's going to be a standard edition, which is going to come in a decorated slipcase and includes 5 adventure booklets, a guide to the Unity for the GM, a booklet of condensed core rules, and an exclusive Avatar Legends GM screen. So that's going to be your basic thing. Then there's what they're actually kickstarting primarily. The premium edition is going to include everything in the standard edition, plus it'll all come in a handsome collectible box, and it will have a collection of in-world elements from the adventures, including bending scrolls, in-world handouts, maps, and other elements that the GMs can use an immersive experience for their players. So the idea here is, I'm guessing the pricing for the standard edition is effectively going to be similar to an adventure guide book, but the premium edition, it's going to depend on what exactly they're giving you, but it's going to be priced like a premium product. The thing I notice immediately is that I would fully expect that one of the stretch goals is probably just to turn all the different booklets just into a hardcover book, because it is effectively like 95% of what an adventure guide is, and kind of why isn't it just a hardcover Unity adventure guide style thing. But what are your thoughts on this? How much have you been keeping up with recent RPG information?
Yeah, I always feel like there's a lot of RPG stuff coming out, and some of it is pretty cool. I mean, it's sort of you're making your own sort of adventure type of game, so sort of the draw of it is from that, not necessarily from sort of the accuracy or anything like that in terms of the history of the world building. But there's always, little nuggets that we can pull from them that I think is really cool to find out. And this definitely feels like, if they are doing more of the adventure style thing, that there's probably more to this than, maybe in some of the other sort of games that we've had come out recently. So it definitely seems pretty interesting. And, it's just another cool thing that we see that, it's an official sort of product that's coming out. So that just speaks to sort of the strength of the brand in general. So that's always good to see in general.
Yeah, for me, what's kind of pushed this over the edge is I like that they've already confirmed that there is like a proper lore section of this, in that like there's obviously some lore in the adventures with the setup and certain new characters, but I like that there just is a guide to the Unity, as in like there just will be a lore booklet, I suppose, describing the ship, like how big it is, like the different sections of the ship, I would guess, what its kind of planned kind of map through the nations is actually going to be. Maybe a little bit of a history thing on, when exactly in the era did it start, when did it end. Like there's a mention of a lot of potential spy sabotage stuff happening. Like, did anything actually happen to it that was that bad, or did it like succeed? Did it sink? I wonder, will some of that stuff be in here? The only thing that seems like it's missing here is that there's no confirmation of new Legend NPC characters. They do mention that Takukak is involved in this, but we already have his Legend NPC stuff from the Wanchi Tong Adventure Guide. So that's a bit of an interesting one. We'll see if maybe a stretch goal might be to add a Legend NPC. Hard to say. My guess is that the pricing is going to play a pretty big role in terms of how much interest is going to be here, because I think the RPG is already a relatively niche thing within the fandom, but now you're doing a Roku specific thing that's not one of the main releases as like a Kickstarter thing. This will be kind of telling, I think, for like how popular Avatar is in terms of this new Kickstarter, how well this does. I'm guessing there might be some pretty nice collectible stuff here that draws people in. Maps is probably the most standout thing to me, but if they overprice it, I think I might end up just getting the standard edition. It's an interesting one. I like to have the RPG material, but it'll be interesting to see how it all plays out. But still, no clear-cut suggestion on when exactly it's launching. It just says soon, and there's very little communication on social media about, like, is it in a month, a week, 2 weeks? More than that, I have no idea. It seems like a reasonable time to do it, like anytime soon, before anything pretty big happens in the year. So I'm kind of like, no need to wait any longer, because I think this was meant to be end of last year. It didn't quite happen, so I'm assuming it's happening like any week now. But what are your thoughts on that? When do you think it's actually going to launch, and what are your thoughts on how well you think something like this, that's a little bit niche, might actually do as a Kickstarter?
Yeah, that's a good point there. It does feel like it's even a bit more sort of niche than the other ones, which I don't know. I mean, the whole idea of the role-playing games, it's niche, but it, also has a very sort of dedicated sort of audience that's really interested in it. So I'd be surprised probably if it wasn't successful, unless it was like, I don't know, a really sort of high value that just sort of couldn't be met or something like that. But I'm sure they've, probably factored in, hundreds of different things in terms of like how successful it can be and stuff like that, unless, certain things are really sort of extra sort of price or anything like that. So I don't know. I'd be surprised if it doesn't go through in the end, but I don't know. I'm really curious to this one because it does feel a bit more sort of unique than even the other ones were.
Yeah, I think the fact that they have a standard edition means they're gonna succeed with whatever their goal amount is. It's probably just about, is the premium edition viewed in any way as being value, or will it be just viewed as being kind of overpriced? That's the big thing. But yeah, we'll cover this when it launches. These campaigns are always cool when they launch because there's always little bits of information that they get, because they have to preview the material to a certain degree. Though I would say even for Magpie, I don't think they ever do a particularly great job at actually like saying all that much about what the books are about. Like the Uncle Iroh Adventure Guide, I think kind of just released and not many people cared about it because there was a lot of a sense of like, wait, what's it about? The Jasmine Island, what is that? Like, you haven't really told me what it is. It's cool when you read the material, but the lack of like preview pages, I think maybe is something that they maybe need to look at overall. But we'll see what happens here. It's interesting, Roku themed in its entirety, and there's some potential cool visuals that we'll get out of like maps and bending scrolls and stuff like that. So yeah, we'll keep an eye out for that. Final news is, again, it's a more speculative thing, but it's actually quite cool if it ends up actually happening here. So the idea here is that this is effectively a rumor that Avatar: The Last Airbender is going to be getting a Magic the Gathering trading card game set. To start the explanation here, the idea is that Magic has moved in recent years to using IP-based stuff in their sets a lot more, to the point where 2025, of the 6 standard sets that they're going to release in the year, 3 of them are going to be IP-based, or as they call them, Universes Beyond sets. 2 of them have already been announced. There's going to be a Final Fantasy set, there's also going to be a Spider-Man set, and then the 3rd one is just called UUB, something Universes Beyond. We don't know what it is, but the rumors are suggesting that that final one that's going to, I guess, release like roughly late in the year, like November, December, will be Avatar: The Last Airbender. The reason that this is in any way in play is that, one, they're already confirmed Magic to be doing some SpongeBob SquarePants Magic the Gathering cards via the secret layer kind of made to order drop things. That's not a full set. That's more of a kind of almost gift set style kind of packages, the way they do them. But Nickelodeon is on the table working with Wizards of the Coast, and Avatar fits a lot better to be a full set. Overall, it almost feels like it's a Magic plane just by itself. The actual evidence about this being the case is kind of hard to explain, but I'll do my best here. Magic Arena is the digital platform for Magic where you can buy cards and stuff like that. You can play the game. They have these bundles of like card styles that you can get. And earlier on in January, they seemed to do a thing where each day they put up a themed group of like 8 to 10 cards. And people began to notice that they were themed very clearly based off the 6 sets that are coming out in 2025. Like, as in January, they did a preview roughly with these kind of groupings of cards for all the sets. And if you go through it, you can see that they sort of match up. The first Magic the Gathering set is Aether Drift. It's going to be kind of vehicle themed. And they did a whole thing on Magic Arena of all vehicle artifact based cards. The second one involves dragons. And there was a whole themed day where it was all dragon cards. The third one is meant to be Final Fantasy. And what do you know? The theming here is a lot more specific, where it's all crystal-based cards, and then they also include the card Final Flare, which I believe is like an attack in Magic in Final Fantasy. Continuing on, they have like a space opera themed set coming up, and they had a group of cards that was all star-based. Then Spider-Man should be up next. What do you know? It's a day with all spider cards. Leading us to the final day, which is this unknown set that's meant to be Avatar. And the cards listed are Into the Fire, Water Knot, Earth Cult Elemental, Airdrop Aeronauts, and then randomly Distended Mindbender and Oswald Fiddlebender. So Fire, Water, Earth, Air, and then 2 cards that mention Bender, which seems very on the nose for Avatar. It's a really weird connection. I don't know how people particularly caught this, but when you lay it out, it feels like I'm sold. There's no super concrete evidence here necessarily, but everything lines up to where Avatar fits pretty nicely in here, and I think people would like an Avatar Magic set. It's just waiting for actual confirmation. I suppose, what are your thoughts on just the concept of Avatar getting a Magic set, and what do you think of it actually happening?
I mean, the idea of it, I think, is cool. I mean, it definitely feels like it fits into the powers and abilities that you would use in this sort of game and stuff like that. Although, there's many ways you can make that work, regardless if it actually is sort of fitting. But yeah, I mean, in terms of this actually being a thing, I mean, I don't know, the idea of the benders and stuff like that, and elements and stuff like that, that seems, from, of course, from our perspective, that feels like pretty synonymous with that. Like it'd be really hard to place that as something else. Now, whether it's sort of like an official tie-in or if it's some sort of like homage sort of reference to it, I don't know. I mean, Wizards Coast and the whole Magic the Gathering is a pretty big thing, so I can't see them doing something, sort of that specific and not having like an actual like official sort of permission licensing sort of deal, stuff like that, because that could turn out pretty bad if it wasn't that way. So I don't know. I wouldn't be surprised if this is sort of another sort of, content integration branding thing that's just sort of leading towards more stuff.
Yeah, and I think I've looked into this on both sides of things. I think Avatar fans want this. I think Magic the Gathering fans want it as well. And both sides think the evidence seems to point to that as well. That yeah, we are absolutely expecting there to be like an Ang Magic card with like a probably multicolored kind of casting cost and all the thematic effects that you can possibly have, and it's going to be a full 200 plus card set realistically, because it would be listed as one of the 6 main sets for the year. So the hope will be probably Avatar plus everything else, and then the timing of a release maybe in like December also kind of fits pretty nicely with the movie out in January. There were some thoughts about how maybe when this was properly planned, maybe the idea is that the movie was still coming out October 25, so this would be coming out like maybe the month after the movie, but instead it's maybe going to be the month before. I don't think that matters too much because the marketing will be in play and everyone will know about Avatar just through trailers and stuff like that. And I think Avatar would work regardless of if you, I think, had the super heavy connection. But we do with the relaunch. So I think that all fits quite nicely overall. And I definitely would want it. I love TCGs. I think Magic is a really good game. And I think this would probably be what maybe most people wanted the kind of Weiss Schwartz Avatar set to maybe more be like, where this, if this was to happen, it would have like all new art. I'm pretty sure that's the way all the collabs have been so far, is they've got new artists in to do stuff for them. Some cards might use some stock art, but this will be like probably expected to be 90% new art. And that's cool by itself because we haven't really seen that in a long time. You have to go all the way back to like the Quick Strike card game from like 2006 to for the last time we got like new Avatar art through trading cards. So something to look out for, because this was, I think, the news about like where they put up that there's a thing called UUB was back in like October. So they might be getting to the point over the next couple of months where they'll probably have to reveal what that one is, and then there'll be new unknown sets after this because we're quickly kind of catching up with it. So another one where over the next couple of months we might know exactly what this is, and we'll see if the crazy conspiracy theory of this being Avatar actually comes true, even though it's not actually that great. So that's been all the news. Still waiting for actual news, but it kind of feels like stuff is beginning to happen. Like, there is a full movie that they have to market at some point. There's apparently a toy line, a big toy line from Jazzware is coming. At some point, you're going to have to market that. You're going to have something that makes Avatar super popular again to justify having a big Avatar toy line on the shelves. So it's going to happen eventually this year. It's just how long are they going to wait until they actually deliver all? CinemaCon will get something. Are we just waiting for San Diego Comic-Con? But then even that is kind of like weird because it's a movie. Do many companies do super in-depth marketing stuff with movies, given that this would probably have to be a trailer release rather than like just an announcement of something? A lot depends on what's going on here and what they want to do. My expectation, I think, is that I'm probably expecting some sort of a announcement before Comic-Con, just so they can maybe tie a trailer announcement in with Comic-Con, but I'm a little bit lost. I think everyone's a little bit lost about what the strategy is, but we just have to hope it eventually happens. But Yes, we're talking about the future. Let's go back to the kind of start of Avatar, basically, and do some ATLA reviews. So, like I said at the start, we have two episodes of Avatar to review today: Serpents Pass and also The Drill, which, interestingly, these two, as just a grouping of episodes, are unique because they are often grouped together as a two-parter. These have multiple names. Like, it's in some cases it's called the Journey of Aang two-parter, where it's Serpents Pass is part one, The Drill is part two. Some places it's called The Secret of the Fire Nation. And then an interesting point as well is that the library and the Serpents Pass are sometimes grouped together as a two-parter called The Fury of Aang. So around this time, they were kind of making a big effort to kind of do this kind of grouping together. There's not as many of these as the series goes on, so it's kind of interesting that this is one of the first times you really see that happen. And it is quite plot heavy, but it's interesting that they more focus on trying to group these episodes up when, like, the bossing say arc is about to happen like immediately next. I suppose just before we start, did you have any thoughts on that? Just some of the weird kind of marketing stuff surrounding these two episodes.
Yeah, no, I remember noticing that and how it's sort of they were linked together, and I don't know, for the most part, I think that sort of works in terms of them and sort of how the storyline goes through. So it doesn't particularly bother me or anything like that. And I think it's nice to sit down and sort of watch them sort of back to back and sort of how see how the whole sort of mini arc actually plays out. So that I sort of enjoyed. The other one, not as much. Sort of the Fury Aang, like I get it, but that one doesn't really hit to me as much as this one. And it is too bad we don't get sort of more of them because I really sort of enjoyed them. Like the Day of Black Sun and stuff like that, or even the ones we got in Korra. It's always cool to get them in sort of sets and see a complete sort of idea pass through. But no, it works for me in this turn.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because that's one thing to note at this point of the series. Like, this is sort of where kind of Avatar really evolves and kind of becomes the show that people just absolutely love. Is like when the library starts and the show becomes a bit more plot focused and it's less one-off episodes. It does start with the library. There's fantastic episodes before then. There's like one or two episode arcs that happen in the previous run, but there's this real continuity that happens here where, yeah, like you can group 10 and 11 together as a two-parter. 12 and 13 technically is the same, and then you have like the whole rest of the season is effectively a Bossing State arc, and they kind of continue that into that momentum into book 3 as well. So yeah, we'll start with the Serpents Pass. So this is book 2, episode 12. I really like this episode. I think of the two here, I prefer this one by quite a big margin. I think this is actually a really, really well put together episode. Very notably at the start, you notice that they do in the previous on Avatar that, like, okay, we're reintroducing older characters. Jet and Suki are coming back here, and that gives you a sense where, like, again, like halfway through the series, it feels like they've figured out what they want to do. These are the characters from earlier episodes that we want to return, and they incorporate them into this episode very nicely, and they kind of transition from the library stuff to focusing more on Bossing Say, while still having all these character arc moments happen with Aang, Katara, Sokka, Suki, of course. But then Zuko and Jet is sort of like a very interesting kind of duo to kind of pair together. And I just think like this one, from a character, emotional perspective, works really well. While also, I think, being probably one of the best episodes at actually presenting that, like, oh yeah, there's a war going on. This is what's happening to the Earth Kingdom. Like, refugees is like a pretty big part of this episode, and that's presented, I think, quite clearly here, whereas maybe it doesn't come up as much in other episodes. So I really like the Serpent's Pass, but what are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, no, I think it does a really good job of giving you a great sort of scope of the war. Because, I mean, like you were saying before, like, when it was just sort of our gang, our team Avatar or to be named team, they're sort of isolated. Like, they know there's a war going on. Everyone actually has been, affected in some way directly for the most part. But, they haven't really seen sort of the huge amounts of people that are sort of, having to sort of deal with this conflict that's been going on for hundreds of years. So I think this one, like you're saying, it does a really good job of laying that out there in a way that's, pretty understandable without making it seem like, super horrible or anything like that, because, it is a kid's show, so it does have to keep that sort of in mind. But I think it does do a really good job of setting that sort of stage and understanding, that people have to sort of, pick up their lives and move on with it. And, some of it is in desperation, some of them have other reasons for doing it. But everyone's trying to sort of, make their way in the world here. And some people are sort of fighting back, some people are sort of helping out. There's a lot of different sort of elements here, and then getting to see other characters that, now after we know the show's over, we understand that these were fan favorite characters that they decided to bring back. It's cool to get to see them and understand how they play in sort of the larger role of things. So no, I think this definitely does a good job. I think this is a very sort of successful part one to this two-parter here. I think some of the other ones, we kind of sort of go back and forth in terms of which ones, how well they sort of work together, and we sometimes focus on one more than the other. I think these ones are pretty balanced overall, even if there is, some things that, some people obviously like more about one than the other. But I think even both of them have a good bit of action in them, which I think sets them to be very sort of balanced compared to other ones where, yeah, all the action happens in the second one. So, of course, that by default becomes the favorite one.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, we'll jump in here with some talking points. We're not just going to go through it kind of step by step. We're going to do the usual thing of grouping stuff up, getting specific talking points. I actually want to start off with a detail that happens quite early on in the episode, and it's one of the few references to like very old ancient Avatar stuff with Sokka's map that gets soaked at the start here. It's from the library, and he mentions it's 5,000 years old, and then in terms of more modern stuff, like the reason that this is kind of on the fandom's mind is that he opens up the map and you see that Ba Sing Se is on the map. So we know that Ba Sing Se at least has been around for 5,000, the rings around the city and stuff like that. But obviously the city hasn't always kind of been there. So when you go back even more, there's a certain point at which Ba Sing Se isn't around anymore. And so we're thinking about that game coming up that's 7,000 years in the past, so 2,000 years before this map, and it's like, okay, is Ba Sing Se still there? Based on what the guy said in the video, it is apparently, but that's just interesting by itself. They don't tend to have many references to stuff that is multiple thousands of years ago. There's a few references to like a few hundred that has caused issues, like the whole Kyoshi thing. But one of the biggest numbers we've ever seen. I'd love to know some of the details behind this of like, is this just a giant number they threw at the wall and hoped it worked, or did they actually have it planned out? But do you have any thoughts on the legendary map here?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think in terms of its usefulness in the episode, I think it's it's very cool to see how that was the whole sort of crux of the previous episode, and it almost gets sort of destroyed here, but bending helps save the day. But I think the idea of this being sort of a sticking point of an actual hard date. I mean, I do wonder about the whole sort of future planning in terms of years and stuff like that, which I wouldn't be surprised if they didn't have that sort of quite figured out even at this point in the series, because who knows how far shows in history and events will actually go. But in terms of lore building, in terms of the episode and world building, I think it's a great point to keep in mind of how how the world has sort of developed over times, and sort of how involved the spirits have been involved with it. Just the fact that they have that sort of information and stuff like that. So no, I think it's a very cool element, and I think it's it leads to a great sort of helping point, and just helps Sokka's character overall, him being the map guy and everything like that, and idea guy.
And it also works as well with like what they do in the next episode. They highlight the impenetrable city and stuff like that, and it's never been broken through like fully. Like Iroh kind of got through, but like it fell apart afterwards. That this is a city that's been around for like more than half the kind of run of the Avatar, and it's really notable if this city falls, because it's like it's never fell before since it's been kind of built. There's a huge history behind this place in particular in Book 2 Earth. But what's your first kind of talking point, kind of plot point from the episode you want to talk about?
I guess I'll keep going with Sokka and just sort of his sort of, I guess, sort of character arc, and his sort of, I guess, coming to realization of how important people, of course, specifically Suki, but just him sort of in general in this episode, and him sort of figuring things out.
Yeah, this is really good here, because obviously, like, it's the return of Suki. She'll be very happy, but then, interestingly, Sokka hasn't I suppose they reference it in like the swamp, and it's come up a little bit earlier on in the season. Like he's lost in thought over what happened to Yue at the end of last season, but here it comes to a head with like the other love interest kind of comes back in, and he's excited, but he becomes overprotective because what if he was to lose her? What if he fails? He failed before, and he kind of can't quite get past that. And what I really like about this is that it obviously highlights how kind of different Suki and Yue kind of are. Suki's just like so active. She is a warrior as a character. She doesn't really need to be protective. Like obviously everyone's going to look out for each other, but Sokka goes a little bit overboard here. But then you also get the sense of can he kind of move on from that, because there's a relationship for him right here. Yue isn't around. She's the moon still, but like that relationship is not kind of on the table anymore. What's he going to do? And I ultimately like what the way they do it in the episode. It's pretty nice that we'll get to it. But yeah, this kind of simple point of like bringing up continuity from the end of last season with the return of a new character, that it's Suki's return isn't just, and now she's a member of the group, there's no conflict. There's a little bit of like drama that gets brought up, but it's nicely done. But what are your own thoughts on it?
Yeah, no, I think it is very well done in terms of, reuniting these characters that obviously have feelings for each other, but, Sokka himself has actually changed and, has, even from the last time that they met, he's done even more sort of maturing, which I think just speaks towards his character development overall. Just the fact that, they sort of play it for laughs when they first sort of meet here, but it's almost sort of like instantaneous that he's sort of hesitant with things, considering, his, immediate sort of past and his sort of dealing with relationships. So I think that's a really, a good way to show, his sort of character growth. And, doesn't feel like it's too sort of overdone or anything like that. Like we're not sort of, having any sort of conflicts, which has always been sort of a issue for some people. There's really only sort of one side and mainly just sort of one issue, and that's sort of just, Sokka having to come to terms with things. But even just, the way that they set things up initially with the moon in the background, I think is a very nice touch. So they do a good job about that.
Yeah, the moon position basically right between their lips as the kiss is about to happen is like it's such a well done shot to get across like that. It's a relationship thing, but it's not just shipping drama. Like there's proper emotion kind of at play here, where you get where Sokka's coming from, and it kind of continues the trend of like almost like surprise or like odd kiss moments between these two, where like the first kiss in episode 4 was a little bit like out of the blue in terms of when it happened. Then you get this kind of nearly kiss, and then at the end of the episode he surprises her with the kiss because she's tries to apologize. She thinks she messed up things earlier on. That's all I think pretty nice the way it's done. I think we should probably just talk about the other side of this as well, which is there is a little bit of kind of Suki development here in terms of like we learned earlier on in the season from Ayaji that Suki had left, that she was inspired by meeting Team Avatar. We of course see a little bit of this kind of going on in Suki Alone, the comic, which is kind of nice. But then we see that, okay, this is where she's ended up at Full Moon Bay, doing security, doing what she can to help in the war, and realizing that, of course, just protecting the isolationist island where she's from is maybe not the best way to do things when people that she cares about are out there on the forefront trying to stop things. And that's what really inspires her. And even kind of coming after this in terms of like it seems like she moves to get even more active kind of in the aftermath of this, kind of becoming a Kyoshi warrior again, not just being the security kind of guard here. It's pretty nice. There's a slight kind of weirdness about the fact that like it's been so long since her first appearance and then she's gone again after her second appearance. But it makes her eventual joining of the group in season 3 pretty strong, because like finally she's here and she's going to stay here for the rest of the series. But what were your thoughts on how they did the kind of reintroduction of Suki in terms of having to do a little bit of character work to kind of get us up to speed with her?
Yeah, no, I think for the most part that sort of works for me. And now after this show has been out for years, we know that there is sort of more information on that whole sort of idea of how they sort of became sort of the workers in this sort of thing. But I think the idea of her being sort of inspired to actually go and help people in the world and use their sort of skills that they have developed. I think, that feels sort of like on point for sort of like the true heart of sort of some of these warriors and sort of their sort of skills that they have developed. They've now been sort of exposed, like you're saying, to the sort of wider world. And, I think that they're just, their eyes have been open towards that sort of thing. And they realize that, maybe they shouldn't only sort of support their own sort of area here. And, as long as there are people to support the village, that they can go out and do some good as well, which, also was sort of, what Kyoshi did as the Avatar, of course. So it sort of, fits in line with that, even if sort of the original idea of Kyoshi warriors was just sort of to sort of protect the island and stuff.
Hmm. And of course, Suki being here allows us to get the very memorable moment of Toph thinking that she was saved by Sokka when it was actually Suki, and it's just an absolutely fantastic moment. It's obviously primarily it's a shipping moment, not for Toph Suki, but obviously for Toph Sokka, which is a minor kind of ship. Minor, is it big? I get very confused about shippings in this fandom, but it's a fantastic moment still. Moving on from this, I guess we'll go for the Iroh and Zuko side of the story, and this is where they have Jet come into play. So they bring a book one kind of like one-off character basically back on each side of the story, and this time it's Jet meeting Zuko, which is very, very interesting because they're basically both going for characters who need to kind of redeem themselves, quote unquote, is kind of what's happening here. So they're obviously ahead of the gang in terms of being on their way to Ba Sing Se. So they meet on the boat. It's Jet, Smellerby, and Longshot. So the rest of the freedom fighters have kind of split off. They're going to Ba Sing Se with the idea that Jet seems to be ready to kind of turn things around. He kind of realizes that he probably did go overboard, though he hasn't fully dealt with his issues, as we'll see. Again, it's just the idea from like a fandom perspective. I think everyone's always like, yeah, what if these two characters met? And then they do. And there is a kind of connection between the two of them because there's a similarity there, but like they're different in kind of really kind of subtle ways, but they work together to basically get the better food from the captain's quarters and give out to the passengers. So they do a bit of freedom fighting on the boat, which is a nice little thing. And it's the idea of, oh yeah, like what if Zuko joined the freedom fighters? That would be a kind of cool dynamic, but would Zuko accept not being the leader, just being part of the group? And it felt like there was always maybe a little bit of a conflict about to happen, but ultimately Zuko's not really interested in joining the group is what we get. But yeah, what are your thoughts on this, bringing back Jet and some of the other freedom fighters on the Zuko side of the...
Yeah, I mean, it is sort of a funny sort of what if sort of scenario that we have here. No, I think the idea of Jet, I mean, he was a cool character. I mean, I think everyone sort of agreed with that. He definitely, took things too far, which is, sort of why his character ends up where it is. But I think the idea of sort of bringing him back and sort of, having him sort of be sort of one that's interacting with Zuko, it kind of is sort of interesting considering that would be sort of like his worst case scenario of dealing with, someone who's actually a sort of a firebender, considering, his sort of past history and everything. So I think that's a nice touch, and you can see how they can almost get together and work very sort of well with each other. But there's always sort of that underlining sort of issue that Jet has to sort of deal with, that we get to see he's clearly not sort of over by the end of the episode here. But it's cool. I like that he has at least two more people in his crew here in terms of them being sort of the new freedom fighters. So they whittle it down, because if we had all of them, that definitely would be too much to sort of interact with and deal with. And then they wouldn't need Zuko, of course, for this little sort of thing that they do on the boat. So I think this is a nice way of reintroducing him without giving him sort of like a large role or anything like that. We do see him again later on, of course, but he's not going to be anywhere near as involved as we have had him in the past.
Yeah, and that is the interesting thing, is like the Suki stuff. Like Suki comes back in this book on like the Appa side of the story, which is quite interesting. Like she is told about Appa being missing, so is aware of that, but doesn't play as much of a role, whereas Jet is going to be a focus point of the Ba Sing Se arc at some point. So there is actually the very clear setup on his side of the story here. And And I kind of like the idea here where like it seems like Smellerby and Longshot both are happy he's maybe taking the right steps, but are very cautious because they're aware that almost at any point like he could slip back into the way he was because as he actually dealt with it basically. There is some talk when they do get to talking about like how Jet mentions I've done things in my past, as you get Iroh mulling over the idea he's going back to bossing Say for the first time since the siege, of course. So there's a lot of references alluding to bits of continuity that we know before as well. As well as Smellerby getting a little bit of a character moment when like Iroh calls her a boy, and the classic long shot thing of apparently he says quite interesting things with his expressions that like are full sentences that the group can understand, but we as the audience don't fully understand, which is quite fun. And again, it gets across the idea that like I think this is obviously where the Smeller shot ship comes from, is that like those two in particular do seem to get on quite well and always be paired up as well. But yeah, do you have any thoughts on the Iroh kind of part of this dynamic heading for bossing Say?
Yeah, no, that is very sort of, something to make note of considering his past history and things that he's had to deal with and how, we always see Iroh sort of as the wise character and sort of able to sort of deal with many things considering his past and things. So definitely feels like he's able to take everything in stride a lot better than Zuko for the most part. He does have sort of the odd moment with the heating and the tea and stuff like that, but besides sort of that, he seems very sort of, contemplative of, sort of returning back to this place that he's had such a history with. Not that anyone knows or recognizes him or anything like that. But, he knows what has happened with the past, and Zuko does, of course, as well. So no, I think this is definitely something to see him in this sort of way, that's completely different than before. So I think it's a nice way to see him, essentially sort of rebuild his sort of character in sort of a way here, not sort of the general of the West or anything like that, just sort of as a normal sort of older-ish type character, sort of trying to make their way as well.
Mm-hmm. This then, I suppose, brings us into the kind of like main plot of the episode, which is obviously the Serpents Pass, but kind of primarily actually like this is where like Ying, Thon, Hope, and I think it's Thon's sister, who's unnamed, also come into play. Which these are interesting characters because obviously they'll be in the next episode, and then they were in Zuko Alone as well. You briefly saw them, so they're kind of highlighting these particular refugees that, as we go through the main characters' journeys, there's also, hey, here's this kind of couple who are about to have a child, and what's happening to them because they've been displaced because of the war. And so that continuity is kind of nice, where it feels like, oh, we initially helped them get to Full Moon Bay and that should be it, but then we need to help them out again because something happened, and this is where we get involved in the action. I think it's quite clever what they do with Ying, Thon, and Hope, to the point where I would like a follow-up on like, who does Hope grow up to be type thing, and that sort of thing. But I suppose before we get into Katara and Aang, what are your thoughts on how they use those kind of minor characters, Ying, Thon, Hope?
Yeah, no, I think that's a good, sort of way to push the story through and to give our characters sort of an extra, sort of, focus for what they're sort of doing here. Because, clearly, they could have, there's many different ways, depending on the circumstances that they could have, completely sort of bypassed this whole sort of situation here, right? Like, if they had Appa, of course, they could have just flown over everything. They had the passes, but of course that creates sort of issues when this couple is having sort of problems of their own here. But luckily they already knew about the Serpents Pass, from Sokka's map and stuff like that. So I think it's, I don't think it's too much of like a cheesy way to push this through, because the whole, idea of these episodes and everything like that is just to show sort of the effects of the war, right? So, the fact that we have at least one couple to focus on, because, that helps us sort of, get more sort of personal with the issues, right? Because we can see, all the people there and all the people that have been displaced. So, you can see sort of the impact overall, but, there's no sort of direct sort of human connection unless we have a real sort of, group that, we can see have this effect. And, we have sort of seen them in the past. So there is that sort of through line. They're not, sort of completely random, even though, it is sort of random in a way here or there. But no, I think it works for me the way that they use them as characters here. And, the fact that it helps some of our other characters deal with their own sort of issues here, as we'll get into.
Mm. Yeah, and then it is interesting, yeah, like just main characters who we know are refugees, where it kind of feels like we don't see this maybe as much in terms of like coming to mind. It's like the Great Divide, the two tribes, like we technically never see like where they're from. They're just traveling like because they're refugees. So it's an interesting kind of connection in a way. But yeah, I think it's worth having a talk about the stuff that happens at Full Moon Bay and the idea that, yeah, we do get to see this as an important kind of way to get into Bossing. Say, they highlight the kind of like strict way in which they kind of govern over all of this in terms of, again, cabbage merchants. So like they don't want disease getting in, so his cabbages get got again. But that if you don't have ID, they can't let you through because Bossing Say is the last big standout in the war. They can't just be letting everyone through. They have to be cautious, otherwise everything could fall. And it's that interesting kind of strictness versus trying to focus on like the humanity of the situation. And ultimately, of course, it's the kind of like, because Toph is a Bei Fong, that's the only reason they get tickets, because Aang doesn't have an ID because he's from 100 years in the past. That sort of idea. But they have to help the characters that they've met. That's what the whole series has been about up to now. We do these side story things, and the whole point is helping the different people along the way, and not just being laser focused on we need to go here. So yeah, lots of interesting stuff happens at Full Moon Bay, which just by itself is an interesting location. But do you have any thoughts on the whole ticketing situation and everything that happens here?
Yeah, no, that definitely sort of stands out. Just the fact that there's this whole sort of setup and, control and access and denial, and just, how painful that can be for people in terms of, trying to get through things. It definitely feels like you have to sort of know someone in order to get through here. And luckily the group, even though it doesn't work out with them, they have Toph in their party, which, considering she's just sort of like ran away from her mom and dad, it's interesting that she has this sort of like ID on her that identifies herself. So I guess she didn't, quite let everything go from her sort of past life, but it does help. And we've seen other times, or we will see other times, where Toph's sort of history in high society actually comes to sort of like help them in some regards, even if she wants to reject all of it and claim that she's doesn't want to deal with it. She knows things, and that sort of helps the group because Katara and Sokka, obviously, they're from such a remote area that they might as well be just as far as remote as, sort of Aang being 100 years ago in terms of, actually dealing with current sort of world affairs and events, right? So, they know a little bit more than Aang, but not much more, especially not in terms of traveling in this sort of day and age. So I don't know, I like that sort of aspect of the group and how that sort of dynamic works. But yeah, the whole Moon Bay and how you pass through it is interesting. Even from seeing how Iroh deals with it is interesting, and how did they get sort of the official documents or him and his sort of charm in order to get through security and borders and stuff like that. But yeah, definitely, is an important thing to note at this point in time in the world.
Yeah, those White Lotus documents do wonders.
Yeah.
But yeah, this moves us on to then the kind of second half of the episode, and the kind of main focus ultimately to a certain degree, and that is the Katara Aang stuff, and then I guess we'll get into the actual action of the journey across the bay. But yeah, we continue this on directly from the desert, this dynamic, but where Katara is pretty similar. There's the direct continuity there of that she's still very worried about Aang, but this time for different reasons, because while she had to kind of calm Aang down because he was angry and filled with kind of fury and rage in the last episode, he's kind of taken the reverse approach here, where if he cares too much, he might kind of lose control, so he's trying to not care. But she finds this almost to be worse because she doesn't want him to stop caring, because he's the Avatar. He has to, above all else, he has to be someone who cares, and it's a very important thing for her that she tries to talk to him about. But initially he doesn't want to do that. Like, she tries to do the kind of emotional you need a hug thing, but he just kind of is like bows and is very formally like, thank you for caring about me. We'll be on our way. And then the most notable thing thematically in the episode, the sign at the start of the Serpents Pass of like abandon hope, which affects pretty much everyone. But then Aang is like, actually, maybe it's true. Maybe we agree. It kind of lines up with what the monks teach us about this as well. But for Katara, of course, that's super important for her to have hope, and the idea that Aang represents that hope to her. I think this is a really well done character arc, and we'll get to how they kind of resolve it at the end. But the conflict of this, I think, is nicely done, because Aang does address that the reason he takes this new approach is because he's afraid of kind of what he nearly did in the last episode, if not for Katara calming him down. But what are your thoughts on the Katara Aang dynamic across this?
Yeah, no, I think this is, like you're saying, it's a very, very good one, because it definitely, you can see how Aang is very sort of hurt by the previous actions of, losing Appa here. And, he, like you're saying, he tries to do a 180 in terms of, sort of being able to sort of let things go, which, we know has always been Aang's sort of issue, that he's very sort of emotional and very sort of on his sleeve type of character, which, generally makes him an interesting character and a fun character to be around. So definitely hurts Katara to see him sort of act in this sort of way that's completely different than, sort of what she's known, what anyone in the group has sort of known of Aang to be at this point. So I think, I think it's good to see Katara try to reach out to Aang this sort of way. Her character's always been sort of about hope and everything like that. So if anyone's eventually sort of gonna break through to him, it would be Katara. I'm sure the others sort of notice it as well, but they're, not as sort of, I guess you could say, equipped to sort of dealing with this. But no, I think this is definitely a good point, considering, what we see even in the future in terms of Aang and his sort of, attachments and being able to let go, because he knows all of these principles. That's sort of the sort of general air nomad, the monk sort of philosophy, right? But that's just been one thing that he's always struggled with. So it's interesting to see him try to like implement it in like a very sort of severe way, and how it just sort of backfires on him.
This is resolved at the end of the episode when Ying gives birth to her daughter, and Aang eventually goes in to see the new baby, and he does actually get quite emotional. The birth of this kind of child kind of brings back his own hope. He gives a speech about this, and it is the focus of this, and that like I suppose Team Avatar have given this family hope as well. Like, they didn't know what they were going to do, but now they're on their way to Ba Sing Se. Her child has been born healthy, and so she kind of names it after like this very kind of theme here of hope, and this brings Aang's hope back. Katara's happy to see that Aang is kind of back, and it all kind of works out really well, which is kind of just really cool the way they do it. I especially like the kind of final one-on-one scene Katara and Aang have, because it is really emotional. She is so happy to see that he's kind of back. He thanks her for kind of not giving up on him. Basically, he was running away from his feelings, but that he's now reminded that he needs to care about Appa, and that, it also reminds him of how he feels about Katara, and they have a pretty nice hug here, just highlighting that this is the strength of their kind of connection here, why it's so important. And it kind of gets into the idea of like attachments are going to come up later in the book, just about someone else other than Appa, which is quite interesting. Really nicely done. I've seen some people maybe say is it a bit like cheesy that they really go in on the hope, the child is named Hope, but from the kind of family's perspective, like they've just had this kind of adventure with the Avatar and his team, naming their child after sort of like this incident in a way is like, it makes complete sense to me, and I really like it. But what are your thoughts on how they resolve kind of Aang's kind of arc here?
Yeah, no, I think this, I guess, from our perspective of sort of watching, sort of Aang and Ko's sort of adventures here, this seems like, almost like normal day sort of occurrence here. But, this is probably very sort of unique in terms of like this sort of family and them sort of like involving with people, especially since, it doesn't seem like any of them are benders, or they have, sort of any sort of bending skill set that would help them out in this sort of situation. So no, this would seem like sort of an extreme event that you would have to sort of, want to keep in mind for future, sort of generations to sort of know and understand. But no, I think, the resolution of this, I think, for me, it works pretty well. The birth of a child that usually inspires hope and wonder and awe in people. So I think, in terms of that sort of aspect of things, I think, maybe it's a little bit cheesy, but that, sort of is sort of how that sort of works in terms of, people and humanity and stuff like that. So, no, I think that works for me. I think that, it's a good thing that, of course, Katara is, the one to sort of take charge in the situation because, she's had experience in doing this in the past, as opposed to Sokka, who just sort of instantly freaks out in the beginning. So, there is some sort of, fun and laughs there, but it is, a serious situation here, but it does, get resolved pretty well and, puts Aang back on sort of the path of actually sort of understanding people and wanting to relate with them, even if, this does cause him issues later on, as we see.
So yeah, it is a good point, yeah, about like Katara knowing exactly what to do to help someone give birth. She knows what to do. Just another example of like she, like last episode and this episode are like two of Katara's best episodes in terms of just representing what her character is about and what she brings to the group, and all of these kind of skills, both in terms of like kind of practical and also emotional, I guess. So really good stuff on the Katara side of things. And then that mostly leaves us with just the sort of action of going through the pass here. There is some very cool stuff, very cool bending of like they decide to kind of go underwater to kind of get through most of it, which is quite cool. They have two powerful water benders so they can just do it. I would have liked to have seen maybe more of a reaction from the family about this, of just this crazy thing happening to them, meeting the Avatar walking underwater. But it's still super cool as you see the fish, like Momo swims out from the bubble. It's really nicely animated as well. Then there is an attack from a Fire Nation ship that comes in. Suki actually is the one to deliver the interesting kind of like line about foreshadowing stuff. She mentions that like, oh, over there, like across the mountain, like there's a secret happening in the Fire Nation. They're doing something, which I think is just a setup for the drill, if I remember correctly. But it's hard to say. And yeah, then we get a lot of the stuff like, yeah, Toph gets trapped on some ice at one point, and she's forced to kind of cross that basically blindly. And just in general, I think it's pretty nicely done with sort of like a different style of action where they're just ambushed from the water by a ship and then by the serpent, and how do we actually like deal with that. Again, Katara gets to do some really impressive stuff as well, and Suki being the one to immediately jump into action to save Toph, while Sokka's trying to get like his shoes off, I think is a fun moment. But what are your thoughts on the action as we move across the pass?
Yeah, no, I think this is a good sort of action set piece here. We've heard how dangerous this path is, and we didn't really sort of understand it in the beginning, and you're supposed to abandon on hope if you across this. But this is the time where we actually get to see our sort of crew actually work together to fight sort of a large foe that is something that most of them don't have any sort of experience with, like they did have the Unagi, and Sokka makes a joke about that with Suki here, which of course she doesn't know anything about or anything like that. Even Aang, having rid the Unagi, wouldn't necessarily try in this sort of instance here. So, it's interesting to see them sort of try to distract it, try to combat it, try to different techniques in terms of getting it, and they have to use this whole sort of whirlpool method to sort of, knock it out itself. So no, it's cool to see them sort of work together here. That definitely feels like a strong move to use in this sort of environment, and also just showing Katara's sort of progress as a waterbender, right? Like, even her just sort of trying to freeze it from the initial sort of get-go seems like a pretty sort of big move to me for them to actually sort of do here. So no, I think this is a really cool scene. Like there's not, much action in this episode, but when we do get it, it's pretty sort of impactful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then stuff like, Toph with her amazing senses, just able to immediately kind of help anyone who kind of falls off the side of the cliff, basically, because she's like aware of every bit of earth in the environment and can just immediately make a new kind of kind of footing for people. But yeah, the final thing then is just a cliffhanger ending. Aang kind of goes on ahead to kind of scout out Ba Sing Se, but discovers the drill. So there is a drill heading for the walls of Ba Sing Se, with the idea being that this is like probably like the most notable piece of technology we've seen in the series so far. This is a giant
Mhm.
drill coming for the walls, and the idea is Aang doesn't know what to do. Will the Earth Kingdom know what to do? The Fire Nation have been working on this for a while. And again, this whole episode about refugees, Ba Sing Se, the only real safe city, we can't let this place be broken into, or everything is lost in this episode where we've just gotten across the importance of there being a safe place like Ba Sing Se. So it's a very effective cliffhanger ending. And we'll jump straight into the drill, of course, which is an episode where I mostly like it because especially like by the time you get to the end and you get to the big action moments, it's really really impactful. Like Aang versus Azula, and then like Toph and Katara holding up Ty Lee and the slurry, Sokka's clever plan. I think the only issue I really have with the episode is just that I think General Sung is not
Mm.
treated or presented seriously enough as a character, given that like he's leading the defense of Ba Sing Se, and we were quite serious about the refugees and the importance of this in the last episode, and then it's kind of weirdly jokey at the expense of the Earth Kingdom, who actually have been the ones kind of like keeping the world in the war. So just from a war tone point of view, I think Sung was maybe a little bit off. I get it. We want Team Avatar to be involved in the action, but I think there could have been a way to use the actual like Earth Kingdom army a little bit more effectively, and not just have like five guys get taken out and him basically admit defeat, and then all they do is chuck rocks directly down, and that's all. That's the only plan they possibly have. But I think that's just what's always going to happen with one of these episodes where it's like it's not the finale, but it's a notable action scene, and you want the main characters involved. It's kind of tough, but yeah, it's still a really really memorable episode. But it's much more action focused than the previous one. But what are your overall thoughts on the drill?
Yeah, no, I think overall it's a fun episode in terms of getting our group involved with the conflict in sort of a direct way here, and the fact that they have to sort of develop a plan, they have to execute it, and there's interference that happens. I like all those different aspects. I definitely do get the idea that they do sort of play up some things a little bit more for laughs, and I think if they had maybe a different sort of general, we would have seen this gone in sort of like a different way. I mean, I think it does get, it gets serious by the end of the episode in terms of, how things are actually happening and how, how bad the situation could be. But yeah, it definitely does have a sort of initial sort of tone, interesting way of sort of putting it. But I think, our group would have gotten involved in some way or fashion.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah, as I was talking about, the first thing probably to talk about with this episode is the setup here. We see the drill. With earthbending, we're able to like bring our characters up onto the wall. So they do address that, like, hey, we sort of drop like Ying, Dan, Hope, and so on just off on the top of the wall. They're not meant to be there, but okay, they bring them up there. It's interesting to think about this in the context of like what's about to happen with the whole conspiracy thing, where like here's a whole group of characters who's clearly aware that the war is actually going on and the security kind of situation there, but we'll get there. But yeah, we meet General Sung, who is later, I think, revealed to be a Council of Five member. I don't think they quite say it here, but he's leading the defense on the walls here with his Terra team, which he has a lot of confidence in. And yeah, it's just, we present the idea. He's very like arrogant. No one can break through. It's Ba Sing Se, not Na Sing Se. And they're like, okay, cool. We'll wait and see what the Terra team does. They get sent out, and literally Ty Lee on her own takes out the entire Terra team. That's it. They're just gone. They get chi blocked and defeated. And Sung, this is where I said, like, he immediately gives up, and this is how Team Avatar is brought on board. That he has no other plans whatsoever to do anything other than just throw rocks, and it's left to the kids he's just met to mount the entire defense of the walls against the drill. That's, like I said, the only, like, I think problem with the episode is that this as the first real kind of conflict almost of the war. Like I get we had like the Northern Air Temple was sort of also a battle. We had the battle at the north. This is the first one in Earth Kingdom we've kind of seen, so I would have appreciated it being a little bit more serious. But I do really like that this is where they super get across how like dangerous Ty Lee is. That most people are not familiar with chi blocking, so they have no defense against it, especially maybe slower moving earthbenders. So Katara has to bring them up to speed on this quite quickly because she was the one most impacted by the shock of losing her bending temper. But what are your thoughts on a lot of this stuff set up at the start here with General Sung, the Terra team, and then Ty Lee's chi blocking coming in important in clutch here for Azula's side?
Yeah, I don't know. It's interesting sort of setup here because I mean, I don't know, his General Song's sort of like arrogance here feels like he may be one of the council that hasn't been involved with the war on sort of like an external front, considering he's just here sort of protecting the gate. So I don't know. I wonder if that leads to him sort of being sort of very sort of like inexperienced, which, could have been a different way that they could have gone about sort of, explaining how our team is sort of going to get involved with this conflict here and maybe not making it sort of as of a fun sort of joke thing. But I think in terms of the setup, it works. I like the way that they're using sort of Ty Lee in this way, where like you're saying, people wouldn't really have any sort of experience with this sort of chi blocking sort of technique or anything like that, especially in Ba Sing Se, where from what we can tell, even though they're a huge city with refugees and people coming into it a lot, everything is very sort of regulated, taped down. People don't even speak of the war, even though people clearly know that there's a war going on. Like it'd be kind of hard for 100 years for that information not to go out, even if people are trying to ignore it. But they're not letting it go as well, so maybe they don't have as much sort of progress and innovation as well, considering there's a huge sort of drill coming and they have like almost no idea how to sort of combat it in any sort of way, it seems. There's a lot there that Ba Sing Se, hasn't really had to deal with, which is probably sort of why they're having as many issues as they are having here. So I don't know. There's a lot there that can go with this, and I do like that Katara is the one that's able to sort of explain this to the group because, yeah, like you're saying, she was very sort of upset when she lost her bending, considering like she just figured out how to bend it in sort of like an effective way. So for her to lose it, is a pretty huge thing. But I do like how they're able to sort of use that knowledge in terms of the drill.
Next up, I suppose on the Zuko and Jet side of the story, there's not that many scenes with this. Like, I think this is where Jet actually asks Zuko. Zuko basically refuses, but they mostly end on pretty good terms. But then, right at the end of the episode, this is where Jet notices that Iroh heats his own tea and basically is pretty much convinced they are firebenders at this point. And immediately, it's like a switch flips here, and he's back to basically the Jet we saw in Jet, and his potential redemption is very much at risk because he straight away is obsessed with now following these two. It's not just that they're both going into Ba Sing Se, they'll go their own ways. No, he's now basically started an investigation into these two because he's convinced that they're both firebenders, which is an interesting arc because it keeps Jet in play. Like, will he out them? Will Iroh and Zuko evade him? What's going to happen to both of them? Because there's clearly an arc at play for both of them where Zuko's on a redemption arc, Jet kind of has as well. And as we kind of see, it's about who kicks up the least fuss is sort of actually what the Earth Kingdom cares about here, trying to protect the peace. But what are your thoughts on how they do the Zuko side of the plot?
Yeah, I mean, I think, it's interesting because even Zuko makes note of, Iroh doing a uncharacteristically not wise thing in eating his tea. But, I do like that it will keep, Jet sort of in play here. We can see that his sort of redemption, like you're saying, is very much at sort of odds and ends here because he's, anything that's fire related, at first, he really wanted Zuko on his side because, he can see that, he's been hurt by firebenders. But then, finding out that he could potentially be one, automatically just makes him the enemy by default. So clearly Jet still has a long way to sort of go in his sort of recovery here. But it just sort of shows you his sort of, core sort of, I guess, character traits that he's not able to let things go.
Mm-hmm. And then on the other side of the episode, the focus really, we get straight down to it, is like everyone looks to Sokka. Come on, give us the idea guy. And he doesn't really know initially what to do until Katara describes basically how chi blocking works. It's kind of taking you down from the inside with kind of pinpoint strikes, and that ultimately this is what the plan is going to be. They're going to take the drill down from the inside. Initially the plan is like, okay, we'll cut all of the braces and collapse the drill that way. Then it becomes more directly like chi blocking, where we'll pinpoint specific braces to cut. Then we'll deliver a final blow with Aang, and that should take down the drill overall. So pretty nice stuff as everyone gets to kind of play their role here. Toph basically on her own slows down the drill as much as she can, just bending on the outside. Sokka doing some clever things on the inside, also gets to fight a little bit, and then Katara and Aang doing a lot of bending, especially water bending here to cut through these braces slowly, admittedly, as eventually Azula, Mai, and Ty Lee come into play in the enemies that they go up against. It's pretty interesting. Like, obviously, I think the main fight we want to talk about is more later on. But for the middle section of the episode, like the plan and the initial execution of the plan, what are your thoughts on how this all?
No, I like it. I like when the group has sort of like an idea of what to do and tries to actually sort of accomplish it here. And Sokka having sort of the understanding of mechanics or just engineering in general, I think is really cool to see, considering we don't really know, how he knows this stuff, but he's able to sort of like intuit how the sort of, the process of the drill actually works. And even though he doesn't quite understand the scale of things, which I think, understandably anybody in this sort of era would be kind of surprised at that, considering, how much of a mechanical marvel, even if it's being used for the wrong purposes, this contraption actually is. So, it's pretty huge and pretty daunting task once they actually get to it. But, they're able to sort of take the techniques of Ty Lee and use it sort of directly in a way here, which I think is a really sort of good idea that they're able to sort of translate this sort of idea on the fly, right? Because, there's always, issues and things you have to do with your plan. So I like that they're able to sort of adapt to the situation. So I think they did a really good job of illustrating that.
Mm-hmm. One interesting point I noticed rewatching the episode was when Mai and Ty Lee go to kind of pursue the team down the slurry pipe, and then Mai refuses and Ty Lee goes down by herself. They obviously present like almost in like a funny way of just like, okay, here's just their different personalities. Like, yeah, Ty Lee's going to go down, Mai isn't. But then there's also like thinking about the future, the idea of, they do talk about the idea of like, oh, Azula's going to like give out to us, punish us, shout at us. And the idea that like, actually, I don't really care if Azula gives out to me for this. I'm not going down there. Highlighting that among the two of them, Mai is the one who's less afraid of Ty Lee, of Azula, compared to Ty Lee. So I just thought that was an interesting kind of character point. They don't treat it in an overly serious way here, because it's mostly a joke at the end of the episode where like it's Ty Lee and Azula covered in slurry, and then the hatch opens and there's Mai completely fresh inside because she didn't do anything. But it's a bit of a foreshadowing for the future, which I kind of like, just the different personalities being presented here. Mai is not particularly involved in this episode, but what are your thoughts on the dynamic here, given that it's another appearance from Azula and her team here? How do you think they're used in this episode?
No, I like them. I mean, whenever, they're always like fan favorite sort of side B characters and stuff like that. And, they're very, even if there's not a huge amount of depth with them, in the actual series, I think, you get enough of their personalities that you can sort of understand where they're going from. So to get to see them at this point in time when we don't necessarily know a lot about them, I think it's really good. It's pretty clear cut, sort of what their sort of ideas are, their agendas, sort of how they sort of react to different situations. Ty Lee just being sort of whimsical about everything, even though she's very sort of, serious in her sort of abilities to take down the group. She's, it's interesting to just to see that sort of contrast of personalities, which I think is good. It's a good way to sort of, set up our characters here and sort of have them go through things.
Hmm. And then the final sequence is basically that as Tylee comes down the slurry pipe, this is where kind of Katara catches her in the water to prevent her from getting onto the ground, so she doesn't really even have to fight her, just hold her in place. Toph then arrives, and they both kind of doubly put the pressure on the drill here because it's not getting the slurry out, and so the pressure is building. The braces have been cut. All that's left is for the final blow from Aang on top of the drill. And there's some fun stuff here. He has to avoid the General Sung kind of troops just firing the boulders down, but he needs one of them. This leads to the fight with Azula on top, where initially Azula has the advantage. Aang starts to use earthbending, kind of comes back into it a little bit, but then the fight is completely interrupted when the slurry comes into play and they just start sliding around. And Azula, it takes so long for Azula to get back on her feet, whereas Aang at least has Momo's help to get back up. He's able to kind of create the kind of wedge out of rock, and we get the really cool kind of music sequence here. Runs up the wall, down the wall. One of the most impactful bending moves, I think, in the entire franchise, probably. Like, Azula, if she hit anything with the force that she was sent flying backwards, would have been killed. It's a pretty devastating kind of air attack that Aang does here. Sends the kind of earth wedge into the drill, and this is what collapses everything. And so the drill technically broke through the walls, but is now kind of stuck in the wall. So it's not like there's a hole in it anymore, and they effectively force the retreat otherwise. The episode does mostly just sort of forget about the fact that there's the kind of tanks accompanying the drill, and we don't really address what happens too much with them that much. I guess Toph did something with them off screen, but that's sort of the idea there. Yeah, the final blow moment, as the track I think is called, is extremely memorable as a finale here. So pretty good stuff. But what are your thoughts on how they end the episode?
Yeah, no, I think that always stands out in people's minds and memories of this episode. Is just their sort of final conflict here on top of the drill, and how sort of that plays out, and even Aang using sort of all the abilities that he has sort of developed up until this point, earth bending, water bending, and of course sort of air bending, is all used in conjunction here. And he's sort of almost sort of outplayed initially by sort of Azula here, and just sort of luckily sort of comes to at the right sort of moment here. So even in terms of just sort of a one-on-one here, it's almost sort of Azula's win, if not for sort of the final bit of Aang's sort of actual goal, which is to sort of stop the tank here. So no, I like that they have this sort of moment here. We actually have someone who's sort of like on par with Aang, right? Because up until this point, most of the characters he's been able to sort of compete with sort of one-to-one. There's not been as many characters that really sort of challenge him. So to get to see this from another character, I think is a cool piece here. And with the danger of the drill and everything like that, and everything that's at stake, you can see why it sort of stands out in people's minds and their memory here, and such, like you're saying, the impactfulness of the airbending used at this sort of moment here. And I think that's really cool. It's a really nice way to sort of end the episode. This huge action, even though it does get through the wall, it's not sort of a huge sort of issue, at least not yet, in this sort of instance here. I mean, I wonder, what would have happened if they were actually able to get the sort of tanks through or anything like that. But concerning how the drill works, or at least what we see of the drill, we can understand how maybe those didn't actually get through the hole or anything like that. So no, I think this is a really cool way of ending the episode.
Mm-hmm. There is a quick scene where we just highlight that like Iroh and Zuko are in the city now on the kind of train thing. and they do meet Ying and Hope and Than just to kind of connect the whole two-parter kind of together here. That those characters went from like Zuko saw them from a distance. They had a little bit of an adventure with Team Avatar, and now Iroh actually meets them here on the train. A fun little moment to bring it full circle. We do see them again, I think, in the finale, if I remember correctly. The whole Ba Sing Se has fallen thing, or is that at the start of season 3? There's another scene that includes Ying and Hope, I think, in Ba Sing Se that we do see. So that's a cool bit of kind of continuity with those characters. But yeah, I think that's pretty much everything in these 2 episodes. Next time we do a podcast, the episodes we're going to be doing is on the Aang side of things. Of course, we're going to be doing 214. City of Walls and Secrets, which is a very memorable episode. It's one of those ones that's often kind of highlighted as like, this is one of the best written episodes of Avatar. And then on Korra, we'll be starting book 3, Change, with A Breath of Fresh Air. 2 episodes this time out. So that should be pretty exciting. What are your thoughts on those 2 for next time out?
Ooh, that's going to be pretty cool. I mean, anything in the Ba Sing Se sort of, I guess, arc era, whatever you want to say, is pretty cool. So I think that should be cool to see how that plays out when we actually get to see how things actually work in the city and how things aren't as exactly as we sort of think they would be. And yeah, getting in the core of the next one, I think, I know I really like that season in general, so it should be fun to do.
And I suppose just very quickly, going back to Serpents Pass and the drill, what do you think the Netflix strategy is going to be in terms of potentially adapting, skipping these episodes? Because the drill seems like a potentially quite big CG thing for maybe a one-off episode. It is plot important, as we'll see in a couple of episodes' time, but I think they can write around that if they have to. Serpents Pass, at least parts of it feel kind of important from a character arc perspective. I think a lot depends on, like, are they doing full library? Are we going to have a desert thing? Or are they going to write the book to be, like, extremely Ba Sing Se focused overall and basically just do kind of introduce Toph and get to Ba Sing Se as quick as possible? How do you think they're going to use Serpents Pass and the drill in Netflix Avatar?
Oh, that's a good question, because that is very large sort of set pieces, which, it's a lot of work even in animation, but even more so maybe in CG in terms of budgetary process and, considering how many episodes they have overall, which, we're still trying to get how they're going to do that. I don't know. I could see them doing something on a smaller scale where there's still a group trying to get into Ba Sing Se, but maybe it's not such a huge sort of process. Maybe it's a smaller group that's sort of trying to do the same sort of thing, and our group has to sort of figure out how to stop them. So I don't know. I could see them scaling it down a bit in terms of how to actually get there, but I don't know. They've changed things completely before, so they really could do it in a completely different way that we're not really sort of expecting here, which may or may not work out. So it'll be cool to see how they actually do it. I mean, I would like them to sort of focus more on Ba Sing Se in general, so I don't know. I could see them speeding up to get there, especially if they're going to do a couple episodes there, but I don't know. I'm curious.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see, I suppose, stuff like, did they have actors for like Ying and stuff like that, and some of these kind of key characters, because we assume Jet's coming back, Suki's coming back, and so the Serpents Pass feels like a very obvious episode in that sense. I think people like the actors for both of them in season 1, so kind of have to use them again. Maybe they're used a bit more. Depends on what way they go about doing it. Like, I can see them maybe doing something quite big in terms of, like, maybe Jet and Suki are in from a much earlier point, and we do maybe skip over quite a bit of the very early episodes, but it'll be interesting to see what they do. I don't know when we're going to find out about that. I assume they'll just be acting announcements as the year goes on. But yeah, otherwise that has been episode 284 of the Avatar Online podcast. It's been myself and Greg. Thanks for listening, and bye.
Bye-bye.